Last year, I discovered a truth that shattered me in silence. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was draining our joint savings to pay for his affair. That night, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and began drafting a plan. Not for reconciliation, not for forgiveness, but for his downfall. It began on a Thursday evening, one of those ordinary suburban nights when everything feels routine. I had just finished a long day at work, picked up my son from soccer practice, and swung by the grocery store for milk and cereal. My car was still in the shop after a transmission issue, so I borrowed my husband's SUV. I didn't think much of it. We had always shared everything. Or at least I thought we did. When I slid into the driver's seat, the car smelled faintly of his cologne, mixed with something unfamiliar. A floral perfume. Too sweet, too bold, one I never wore. I shook it off, telling myself it was probably from a co-worker, or maybe the valet service. I didn't want to be that wife, the paranoid one who jumps at shadows. But as I reached into the glove compartment for the insurance papers, a corner of an envelope caught my attention. It wasn't tucked neatly the way my husband usually kept documents. It was shoved inside, crumpled, almost like it had been hidden. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out and unfolded it under the dim yellow light of the SUV's overhead lamp. My stomach clenched. It was a bank statement, not recent, but just a few weeks old. And the numbers screamed betrayal. Multiple withdrawals. Not hundreds, but thousands. Regular. Timed, almost like a paycheck going out, but in reverse. I froze, scanning the list of transactions. Transfers to a name I didn't recognize. Payments for an apartment lease in downtown Nashville. Dinners at steakhouses we could never justify affording together. Shopping charges from boutiques I had only walked past in envy. At first I thought maybe it was identity theft. Someone hacking our account. My heart wanted to believe that explanation so badly. But deep down, the truth pressed harder. My husband had access to this account. He was the only other person with the password. By the time I got home, my hands were trembling. I tucked my son into bed, kissed his forehead, and went straight to the kitchen table. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. The glow of my laptop was enough. I logged into our joint savings, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The screen confirmed everything. Over $42,000. Gone. In less than a year. Systematic, precise. Like someone slowly bleeding us dry. And every dollar was tied to her, the woman he was seeing behind my back. She wasn't just some secret fling. He was building her a life with money we had sacrificed for. I felt my throat tighten. I thought of the nights I clipped coupons, the overtime shifts I had taken, the vacations we skipped so we could save for our son's future. Every compromise I had made was sitting in that account. And now it was funding his betrayal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the laptop against the wall. But instead, I sat there in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling. My tears burned but never fell. In that silence, I realized something important. This wasn't just about another woman. This was about trust, money, and power. In America, money is more than just paper. It's security, stability, survival. And he had stolen that from us. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands steady now. The rage had cooled into something sharper, colder. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with the suburban quiet pressing in on me, I made myself a silent promise. I wouldn't confront him yet. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a fight or an ugly scene. Number. If he wanted to play dirty, I would play smarter. I would learn everything I needed to know. And when the time came, I would make sure the law was on my side. That was the moment the discovery became something else. Not just pain, not just betrayal, but fuel. Fuel for the fire I was about to start. One that would burn down everything he thought he could hide. When I first discovered the apartment lease, tucked away in a manila folder at the bottom of his desk drawer, I thought it was a mistake. The address was unfamiliar, not near his office, not near any relative. My heart pounded as I scanned the monthly rental fee, more than half of our mortgage. It was not until I saw the signature, his signature, that the truth began to carve itself into my bones. My husband did not just have an affair. He had a sugar baby, a girl young enough to be his daughter. She was the one living in that apartment. The one he was funding with money I had believed was meant for our family, for our children, for our future. The betrayal hit me like a storm, but I did not cry. Not yet. I folded the papers back into the folder, slid it into place, and walked out of his office as though nothing had changed. I learned quickly that silence was my only weapon. Screaming would have given him control. Crying would have given him comfort. Silence gave me power. Every morning, I poured his coffee the same way. 2 sugars, 1 cream. I packed his lunch, kissed his cheek, and watched him walk out the door to work. But in my chest, the truth burned hotter each day. Life in our neighbourhood continued as if nothing had shifted. On Saturdays, families gathered for barbecues, the smell of grilled corn and ribs filling the air. The men gathered around the grill, laughing about sports, while the women set out bowls of potato salad and trays of baked beans. My husband stood among them, beer in hand, smiling, joking, the picture of a family man. No one knew that after flipping burgers for the neighbours, he would drive across town to spend the night with her. During the week, there were PTA meetings at our children's school. I sat in folding chairs beside other parents, listening to discussions about field trips and fundraising. He often claimed he was too busy with work to attend. But I knew the truth. While I raised my hand to volunteer for bake sales, he was buying her expensive handbags and covering her utilities. I kept my face calm, nodding, smiling, even as my insides twisted. The hardest part was the normalcy. The betrayal was woven into the fabric of our daily life. On Sunday mornings, we attended church together, shaking hands, smiling at neighbours. On Wednesday nights, we ordered pizza as a family, the children laughing as cheese stretched between their bites. I would watch him laugh with them, his eyes soft, his voice warm, and I wondered how he could live such a double life. Did he not choke on his own lies? Did he not feel the weight of his deception pressing down on his chest at night? At times, I caught myself questioning my own worth. Was I too tired? Too plain? Too old? I replayed conversations with him, searching for signs I had missed, little cracks in the facade. But the truth was clear. It was never about me. It was about him, his greed, his vanity, his hunger for youth and admiration. Still, I did not confront him. I smiled when neighbours complimented us on being a perfect couple. I clapped when he told stories at backyard parties, even as my jaw ached from the effort. I tucked the children into bed each night, listening to their steady breaths, and reminded myself that my silence was not weakness. It was strategy. The betrayal did not just live in hotel rooms or that hidden apartment. It lived in every handshake, every shared meal, every moment he pretended to be someone he was not. And while he believed I was blind, I was watching, waiting, planning. I let him believe he was in control, but inside me, a storm was gathering. The day would come when silence would no longer be my shield. It would become my weapon. After the weeks of silence passed, I realized that emotions alone were not enough to change reality. Anger needed a shape, a roadmap, and evidence that the court and everyone else could see and understand. Therefore, I began collecting each piece. Like a puzzle maker, careful and meticulous. On the first evening I sat down with the printer, I printed out every statement that could be relevant. The joint savings account statements, the credit card statements, and the electronic receipts that I found. I printed 2 copies for each page. 1 copy to read, 1 copy to store. I marked suspicious transactions with a red pen, underlined the dates, the amounts, and noted the places of spending. Seeing the numbers on paper made everything more real. No longer just a vague feeling, but concrete evidence. I also secretly checked the credit card statements. I did not break into my husband's devices or do anything illegal. I used my legal access to the shared records that we both had because I was a joint account holder. I called the bank to request that the statements be mailed to our home address instead of the shared email. I requested certified printed copies so that no one could say that they were altered. Each time a page came out of the printer, I folded it and placed it into an envelope marked with the date and the hour. In addition, I kept all paper receipts. The expensive dinners, the transactions at fashion stores, the payments for the rented apartment, all were arranged in chronological order. I took screenshots of messages, printed email threads, and placed each small piece of evidence into separate folders. I hid 1 set of files in the cabinet under the bathroom sink, where I knew he would never look. And I mailed another set to myself, sealed with an official postal mark. I wanted multiple copies, stored safely, prepared for every situation. While I was collecting evidence, I began to learn about the divorce procedure in the United States. I scheduled an appointment with a divorce attorney. The meeting took place in a small office. Leather chairs, thick shelves of law books, and the faint smell of coffee. I spoke everything out loud. Each discovery, each number, each emotion. The attorney listened, took notes, and then explained the process to me clearly and calmly. First, the attorney said, the initial stage is consultation and evaluation of the evidence. A consultation that is not binding helps determine the next steps. If I decided to proceed, the first step would usually be to file a petition for divorce at the county court where the spouses reside. This petition would state the grounds for divorce under state law and request that the court review matters such as property division, child support and alimony custody, and temporary support if needed. The attorney further explained that many states in the United States apply the principle of equitable distribution, or community property, depending on the state law, and that evidence of misuse of marital assets to support an affair could influence the court's decision regarding the division of assets. The attorney also spoke about temporary measures. In many cases, it is possible to file for temporary orders to protect finances immediately, temporarily restricting withdrawals, requesting that the other party cannot transfer assets, and establishing temporary arrangements for child custody and living support. These measures are not always granted, but if the evidence showed clear misuse of assets, the court might intervene quickly. The attorney emphasised that every act of gathering evidence must comply with the law, not violating another person's privacy, not breaking into devices without authority, and not committing acts of retaliation that cause material harm. Hearing these words, I felt more reassured. I did not need impulsive actions. I needed a lawful strategy. I needed someone who understood the law to represent and protect my interests. Therefore, I signed the service agreement with that attorney, authorised his office to obtain official statements if necessary, and prepared the initial legal documents. In the following weeks, I coordinated with the attorney to draft a summary of events, with the evidence attached. The attorney's office helped me issue formal requests for documents, prepare letters, and guided me on how to preserve evidence in a lawful and persuasive way. I learned how to present a timeline, how to distinguish ordinary transactions from those that served the extramarital relationship, and how to place everything into a legal framework. Each working session with the attorney made me feel more powerful and less anxious. Of course, I said nothing to my husband. On the outside, I was still the same wife, going to the market, taking the children to school, attending the Parent-Teacher Association meetings and cooking meals for the family. I played the role of a busy woman, smiling when the neighbours asked, living as if nothing had changed. That pretense was not out of weakness. It was a tactic. I knew very well that any premature confrontation could ruin the evidence. Give him time to hide the truth or twist the situation. At night, when the house was silent and the children were asleep, I sat at my desk with my files. I reorganised the printed documents, added notes, and prepared the story I would tell before the court. Each page, each word, was a brick in the legal wall I was building. I did not need to scream. I only needed the truth, carefully arranged, and an attorney who knew how to turn that truth into justice. The day I officially began to build the case was the day I stopped feeling like a victim. My attorney had told me clearly, emotion is not enough. Suspicion is not enough. In order for the court to see the truth, I had to show the misuse of marital funds in a way that no one could deny. I needed a case that was not only about betrayal of the heart, but about the violation of law and responsibility. The first category was receipts. Every time I found a paper slip from a restaurant, I preserved it as if it were a rare artifact. Some were for expensive steakhouses, far above the price of any meal he had ever taken me to. Others were for trendy bars that catered to a much younger crowd. I created a folder labeled Dining and Entertainment and arranged them by date. Each receipt told a small story: the time, the place, the amount, and the signature that confirmed he was the one who paid. The second category was electronic records. My attorney explained that emails and online transactions could be presented as supporting evidence if they were authentic and obtained legally. Therefore, I carefully logged into the shared accounts that I had legal access to, and I printed entire threads of communication. Some messages confirmed payments for the apartment lease. Others showed purchases of gifts delivered directly to the address of that apartment. I highlighted the addresses, the names, and the confirmation numbers. These were not whispers of betrayal. These were written confessions. The third category was the lease itself. That single document was like the spine of the entire case. It showed that he had entered into a long-term financial obligation, one that used our marital funds for the benefit of another woman. The lease contained his full name, his signature, the address of the apartment, and the monthly rent. It was irrefutable. My attorney advised me to make multiple certified copies, notarized if possible, to ensure that it would stand firm in court. I placed the lease in a separate envelope, sealed, and stored in a locked drawer, with 2 additional copies stored off-site. As I gathered each piece of evidence, I felt as if I were weaving a net. Not a net of rage, but a net of law. My attorney often repeated, "The court does not rule on feelings, it rules on facts." Misuse of marital funds is a legal issue, and you must show the pattern clearly. That sentence became my guiding principle. So I created a timeline. I opened a large notebook and divided it by months. Under each month, I listed the receipts, the transactions, the lease payments, and the gifts. I drew arrows that connected his claimed business trips to actual charges near the apartment. I placed copies of gas receipts next to toll records that proved he was driving across town on nights he said he was working late. Slowly, the timeline became more than a list. It became a story that no judge could ignore. The more I worked, the calmer I became. I realized that revenge, when guided by anger alone, burns out quickly. But revenge that is built on wisdom and legality becomes justice. I was not only punishing him for humiliating me, I was protecting my children's financial security, safeguarding our future, and proving that deceit has consequences. Every night, after the children were asleep, I would sit at my desk, the lamplight casting long shadows, and I would piece together the story like a prosecutor. Some nights I stayed up until 2 in the morning, my hands covered in ink, my folders growing thicker. My attorney reviewed the files regularly, offering suggestions. Add this detail, underline this amount, highlight this connection. He reminded me to keep the originals safe and to back up the digital copies on an encrypted drive. At times, fatigue threatened to overwhelm me. I was still living the double life of smiling at neighbours, attending parent-teacher association meetings, and hosting Sunday dinners, all while carrying the weight of this secret case. But then, I would look at the lease, the cold numbers on the statements, and I would remember why I was doing it. This was not just a personal betrayal. This was financial infidelity, a direct violation of the vows we had made. Not only to each other, but to the family we had built. By the end of the month, my office drawers were lined with folders labelled receipts, statements, lease, and timeline. Each folder was filled with evidence that turned suspicion into fact. The case was no longer an idea. It was a structure, solid and undeniable. And through it all, I said nothing to him. I continued to pour his coffee, to nod at his jokes, to listen as he told me he was working late. He believed I was blind. In reality, I was building the walls of the courtroom that would eventually close around him. By the time my folders were heavy with evidence, I knew I was ready to take the next step. Collecting receipts and contracts was the foundation, but foundations alone do not shake the guilty. My attorney reminded me that misuse of marital funds is best proven not only by past records, but also by ongoing behaviour. If he continued to spend recklessly, and if that pattern could be captured in real time, the case would be beyond dispute. That was when the idea of the trap was born. I suggested to my husband that we take a small vacation together. I spoke casually, as if I simply wanted to rekindle our marriage. I smiled when I mentioned a cabin retreat upstate, a place with hiking trails and a lake nearby. He looked startled, perhaps guilty, but he agreed quickly, as if eager to show that nothing was wrong. In his eyes, the trip was an easy cover. In my eyes, it was an opportunity. The night before we left, while he slept, I installed 2 small security cameras inside our home. One faced the living room, where he often left his belongings when he came and went. Another faced the desk in his private study, the place where he kept his laptop and phone when charging. These cameras were not hidden in violation of law. They were placed in common areas of our shared residence, well within my right as a homeowner. They would not capture his private conversations, only the proof of his absence and his routines. I positioned them carefully, angled so that they blended with the decor, invisible to a distracted eye. The second part of the trap was financial. I called the bank and requested that our primary joint credit card be temporarily frozen. I explained that we were travelling, that I feared unauthorised charges, and that I wanted added security. The representative confirmed the request, placed a temporary hold, and assured me that I could lift the restriction at any time. What he did not know, and what my husband would soon discover, was that this freeze would reveal more than any receipt ever could. We left for the cabin on Friday morning. The drive was long, filled with polite small talk and music from the radio. He appeared calm, but I noticed how often he glanced at his phone, how his fingers tapped nervously against his leg when he thought I was not watching. To him, this trip was a duty. To me, it was the tightening of the noose. On Saturday evening, after a day of hiking, I pretended to be tired and went to bed early. He stayed awake, pacing with his phone, whispering when he thought I was asleep. Hours later, while he believed I was deep in rest, he sneaked outside to make a call. I heard the crunch of gravel beneath his shoes and the hushed tone of his voice. He was arranging to meet her, the young woman who had become his shadow life. The next morning, he claimed he needed to drive back into town to pick up supplies. He kissed my forehead, promised to return by afternoon, and drove away. I remained behind, staring at the lake, my heart steady. I did not cry. I did not rage. I simply waited. By noon, the cameras at home began to send alerts to my phone. The study camera caught him rushing inside, pulling out his laptop, typing furiously. Minutes later, he left again, returning with bags that he dropped on the living room floor. In one quick glance, I saw the label of a luxury store. Then came the moment I had anticipated. At precisely 1:15, my bank app lit up with a notification. A charge attempt had been made at an upscale boutique in downtown Nashville. The amount was staggering. More than $500 for what I assumed was jewelry or clothing. The transaction was immediately declined due to the freeze. Within minutes, 2 more attempts followed, at the same store, on the same frozen card. Each one failed. Through the camera feed, I saw him throw his hands up in frustration, pulling at his hair, his phone pressed to his ear as he tried to reach the bank. But it was too late. The record was already preserved. Every declined transaction left a digital footprint, stamped with the time, the location, and the vendor. My attorney would later explain that these failed charges were just as valuable as successful ones, because they proved intent, the ongoing misuse of marital funds, captured live in the moment. That afternoon, he returned to the cabin empty-handed, sweating, his temper sharp. He muttered about the incompetence of the bank, blaming technical errors, pretending that nothing serious had happened. I nodded, feigned sympathy, and said little. Inside, I was calm, even cold. My trap had worked perfectly. For the next 2 days, I maintained the facade. We ate, we hiked, we pretended, but I knew the cameras were recording his every move, and the bank records were sealing his every attempt. When the trip ended and we returned home, I collected the camera data, labelled it, and added it to the folders in my drawer. By then, the story was complete. Receipts of the past, leases proving long-term misuse, and now live evidence of him attempting to spend marital funds on his mistress, captured in real time. The trap was not a scream in the night. It was a steady hand, pulling a rope tighter, until the guilty had no way out. And through it all, I never raised my voice, never revealed my knowledge. He believed I was naive, but in truth, I had become something else entirely. I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was the quiet architect of his undoing. The courthouse loomed above me, a stone fortress that had witnessed countless stories of betrayal, justice, and despair. That morning, the sky was heavy with grey clouds, as though it mirrored the weight in my chest. I walked through the metal detectors, my documents neatly organised in a folder, pressed tightly against my ribs. This was not only a legal proceeding, it was the culmination of months of silent suffering, patient planning, and meticulous preparation. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes that seemed to cut through pretense, sat at the bench. His black robe carried the authority of the law, his gavel resting firmly beside him. To his right, the clerk organised files with swift precision. The bailiff stood tall, his presence a reminder of order and restraint. Rows of benches stretched behind me, mostly empty, except for a few curious strangers who had wandered in to watch. My attorney sat by my side, calm and composed, a quiet strength radiating from her posture. Across from us, my husband adjusted his tie nervously. His once confident demeanour had eroded over the past weeks. He avoided my gaze, his eyes darting between his attorney and the empty bench where his companion was supposed to be. The young woman who had consumed our marriage funds and our peace was nowhere to be found. Her absence was louder than any word she could have spoken. The judge called the case. Papers rustled. Shoes clicked against the polished floor. My attorney rose, addressing the court with clarity and confidence. She spoke of marital trust, of the misuse of funds that belonged to the family, of the obligations each partner carries, not only to each other, but also to their children. Every sentence was a carefully sharpened arrow, aimed at the truth I had unearthed. Then it was my turn. My hands trembled slightly as I stood, but my voice did not betray me. I laid out the evidence step by step. I presented the bank statements I had copied, highlighting the withdrawals and transfers. I revealed the credit card charges that traced directly to the rented apartment. I placed before the judge receipts from luxury items, restaurant bills, and hidden gifts, each one signed by my husband. Then came the lease agreement with his name printed in bold letters, the undeniable proof of a secret life. Funded with money that should have gone toward our household, our children, our future. The judge examined the documents, his eyes narrowing as he pieced together the story. My husband's attorney attempted to object, to cast doubt on the legitimacy of my evidence. But my attorney countered each objection with firm authority, citing case law, reminding the court of the legal principle that misuse of marital funds constitutes financial misconduct. The rhythm of objection and response echoed like a duel. Yet, with each exchange, my side grew stronger. I glanced at my husband. His face was pale, beads of sweat forming at his temples. He fumbled with his pen, scribbling frantic notes to his attorney, but his gestures betrayed his panic. Without his mistress present, without her testimony, he stood alone. The illusion of control he had once carried was shattered under the sterile lights of the courtroom. The judge asked me questions directly. I answered with honesty, never embellishing, never faltering. I described the nights I had sat in silence, pretending everything was normal, while he disappeared into the shadows of his double life. I explained how I found the receipts tucked carelessly in his pockets, how the credit card alerts had arrived when he thought I was not looking. My words painted the picture of betrayal not only emotional, but financial, one that struck at the very foundation of trust. As the proceedings continued, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. What began as a contest of arguments was transforming into a reckoning. The weight of truth pressed heavily against my husband. His attorney's voice grew strained, his defences weak and scattered. The judge's expression hardened, reflecting the mounting evidence. Finally, my attorney delivered her closing statement. She did not speak with anger, but with resolve. She spoke of dignity, of fairness, of the right of a spouse to live free from deception and financial exploitation. She emphasized that this case was not about vengeance, but about justice. The words echoed through the room, resonating with every corner of my being. The judge leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the gavel lightly. For a long moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Then he delivered his ruling. He acknowledged the overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct. He declared that the marital funds had been misused, and he awarded me a greater share of the assets to ensure stability for the children and myself. His voice was steady, final, carrying the weight of authority that no one in the room could challenge. I exhaled slowly, a breath I had been holding for months. The sound of the gavel striking wood reverberated through the chamber, sealing the chapter of deceit. My husband sank into his chair, defeated. The mistress who once demanded luxury and secrecy had abandoned him at his most critical hour. And I, who had walked silently through betrayal, now stood fortified by truth and the law. As I left the courtroom, the grey sky parted slightly, revealing a sliver of light. The courthouse doors closed behind me, and with them, the past I no longer needed to carry. The drama of the courtroom was not just a trial. It was the declaration of my own strength, the proof that patience, strategy, and resilience could transform betrayal into empowerment. The courtroom was silent after the judge's ruling on financial misconduct, yet the heart of the case still remained. The custody of the children, the division of the home, and the question of alimony. These decisions would shape not only my future, but also the lives of those most innocent in this storm, our children. The judge adjusted his glasses, shuffled the documents before him, and looked directly at both attorneys. His voice was steady, neither cruel nor kind, but carrying the full authority of the law. He began by addressing the matter of custody. He spoke of stability, of the need for a consistent environment where children could thrive, free from chaos and deception. He noted my careful documentation, my testimony of maintaining the household, attending school meetings, and safeguarding the children's routines, even during the turbulence of betrayal. He acknowledged the absence of my husband during critical moments, his repeated diversions of funds that should have supported his family, and the evidence that showed his focus had shifted elsewhere. The decision was delivered with solemn clarity. Full custody was awarded to me. My husband was granted visitation rights, but under conditions that ensured the well-being of the children. The words struck the room like a final, undeniable truth. I felt tears burn at the edge of my eyes, but I held them back. This was not the moment for emotion to spill. It was the moment for resolve. The judge then turned to the matter of the marital home. He acknowledged that the house had been maintained primarily through my efforts, that I had managed the mortgage, the bills, and the daily upkeep. The evidence of my husband's diversion of marital funds left no doubt that his contributions had been compromised. With that, the house was awarded to me, not merely as property, but as a sanctuary for the children, a place where stability could take root again. Then came the matter of alimony. The judge's tone grew heavier as he addressed my husband. He stated plainly that the misuse of marital funds had placed me at a financial disadvantage. He recognized the sacrifices I'd made to preserve the home, to raise the children, and to maintain the family, while my husband squandered resources elsewhere. For this, the court ordered that my husband provide alimony, a monthly payment to ensure that I and the children could live with dignity. My husband's face turned ashen. His attorney tried to object, to soften the blow, but the judge's decision was firm. The law had spoken, and there was no refuge left for deception or excuses. The final decree was read in full, each line etched into the record. Custody awarded to the mother. Marital home awarded to the mother. Division of assets. A greater share granted to the mother. Alimony, to be paid monthly by the husband. The verdict was not a matter of vengeance. It was the restoration of balance, the legal acknowledgement of betrayal, and the protection of those who had been most vulnerable. The gavel struck once more, sealing the judgment. The sound echoed in my chest, final and irreversible. The courtroom emptied slowly, but I remained seated for a moment longer, absorbing the weight of what had been decided. My husband sat slumped beside his attorney, his eyes hollow, his shoulders bent under the realization of loss. He had not only lost the home, the assets, and the family he once took for granted. He had also lost the illusion that his actions could remain hidden, that his betrayal would carry no consequence. When I finally stood, my attorney placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Her voice was low but steady. "It is done," she said. And she was right. The months of silent planning, the endless nights of doubt, the careful gathering of evidence, all had led to this single moment of justice. Outside the courthouse, the clouds had begun to part. A pale beam of sunlight broke through, casting long shadows across the steps. I paused, inhaling deeply. The air felt lighter, no longer burdened by the weight of secrecy. For the first time in many months, I felt a quiet strength within me. Not born of anger, but of endurance. The verdict was more than a legal victory. It was the reclaiming of my life. It was the affirmation that patience, truth, and perseverance could overcome deceit. The law had given me more than custody, more than property, more than financial security. It had given me closure, a line drawn firmly between the past and the future. As I walked away from the courthouse, each step carried me further from betrayal and closer to renewal. The verdict was final, and with it came the certainty that justice had been served. My children would grow in a home built on truth, not lies, and I, once silenced by shock and betrayal, now carried a voice steady with conviction. The chapter of deception had closed. The chapter of resilience had begun. The courthouse had closed its doors behind me, but the echoes of the verdict lingered in every corner of my life. The weeks that followed were marked not by chaos, but by a steady return to order. Yet, for my husband, the aftermath was swift, merciless, and public. The neighborhood, once blind to his deceit, could no longer ignore the whispers. At the local grocery store, eyes turned away when he walked past. At church, pews shifted to create distance between him and families who once welcomed him. During the Saturday barbecues that had defined our suburban summers, his absence became the subject of quiet speculation. Neighbours, who once admired his confidence, now spoke of betrayal in hushed voices over backyard fences. The man who had lived so loudly in arrogance was now reduced to a shadow, isolated and diminished. Even his friends, those who had once joined him for drinks and idle boasts, grew scarce. They did not wish to be tainted by the scandal. Loyalty was fragile when built on deceit. Invitations stopped arriving. His phone grew quiet. His world, once buzzing with attention, turned into silence. For me, the silence was different. It was not suffocating. It was liberating. With the judgment secured, I began to rebuild the life that had nearly been destroyed. One of my first decisions was practical yet symbolic. I traded the old family sedan for a new sport utility vehicle, large enough to carry my children and safe enough to feel like a fortress on wheels. The leather smelled of new beginnings. Each time I turned the key in the ignition, I felt a surge of independence, a reminder that the road ahead belonged to me. My children adapted with resilience that astonished me. Their laughter returned, first hesitantly, then with the full force of youth unburdened. Our evenings grew brighter. We cooked simple dinners together, shared stories about school, and even planted flowers in the front yard. The house that once carried the heavy air of suspicion now echoed with warmth. It was no longer just a dwelling. It had become a home again. I learned to navigate the responsibilities that came with single parenthood, from balancing bills to attending parent-teacher conferences alone. But with each task accomplished, my confidence grew. Where once I had doubted my strength, I now stood assured. As for my husband, the weight of alimony payments pressed down upon him. His finances, once stretched thin by indulgence, now bent under the court's decree. The apartment he had rented for his mistress was gone, its lease cancelled. The mistress herself disappeared from his life, vanishing as quickly as she had entered, leaving him not only exposed but abandoned. His downfall was not a spectacle of flames and fury. It was quieter, colder, and far more lasting. I understood then a truth that I had not fully grasped at the start of my journey. Revenge does not need violence. It does not need shouting, nor does it need chaos. Sometimes the most powerful revenge comes from patience, strategy, and the rule of law. The courtroom had been my battleground, and justice had been my weapon. The verdict had done what anger could not. It had restored balance without staining my hands. Neighbours continued to whisper about him, but when they spoke to me, their words were different. They spoke of strength, of dignity, of the courage it took to stand in silence and fight with truth. Their recognition was not necessary, but it was affirming. I had not only survived betrayal, I had reclaimed my place with respect. Life moved forward, not in leaps but in steady steps. There were nights when the loneliness pressed hard, when the absence of a partner felt like a hollow space at the dinner table. But even then, I reminded myself, it was better to sit in honest solitude than to share a table with deceit. As the seasons changed, I found comfort in routine. School mornings, soccer practices, and quiet Sunday evenings became the rhythm of our lives. The pain of betrayal dulled, replaced by a steady confidence that I could weather storms and emerge whole. Standing in my driveway beside the new sport utility vehicle, watching my children chase each other across the lawn, I felt a deep sense of closure. The past was behind me, etched into court records and neighbourhood gossip. The future was before me, unwritten, but filled with possibility. Revenge, I realised, is not about destruction. It is about reclaiming what was taken, about refusing to let betrayal define the rest of your life. And sometimes, the best revenge is not in anger, nor in violence, but in the quiet strike of a gavel, in the solemn words of a judge, and in the life rebuilt from the ashes of deceit. The chapter of betrayal was closed. The chapter of renewal had begun. Time passed, not in sudden leaps, but in quiet, deliberate steps. The storm had ended, and in its wake came the calm of rebuilding. Each day no longer felt like survival, it felt like progress, like the slow unfolding of a new chapter where the pages were blank and ready for my hand. The mornings grew brighter. Instead of waking with dread, I opened my eyes to the sound of my children preparing for school, their voices carrying through the halls with lightness. I packed lunches, tied shoelaces and kissed foreheads, not as tasks, but as privileges. These small rituals, once overshadowed by suspicion, now became the foundation of our peace. The house transformed with us. I painted walls, rearranged furniture, and filled empty corners with plants and photographs. It was no longer a reminder of betrayal. It had become our sanctuary, a place that reflected not what we had lost, but what we were building. Outside the home, new opportunities began to appear. I took steps into the workforce with renewed confidence, guided not by fear, but by purpose. Each paycheck was more than income. It was independence, proof that I could stand on my own. My children saw this, and in their eyes I caught glimpses of pride. They were learning resilience not from words, but from the example I lived before them. There were evenings when I sat quietly on the porch, watching the sunset burn across the sky. I thought of the past not with bitterness, but with acceptance. Betrayal had changed me, but it had not broken me. If anything, it had revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. Neighbours still whispered about my husband, but I no longer listened. Their words were theirs to carry, not mine. My focus was forward. My path was not defined by what he had done, but by what I chose to do next. One weekend, I loaded the children into our new sport utility vehicle and drove to the coast. We spent the day walking along the shore, our laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. As the tide came in, washing over our feet, I felt the weight of the past finally dissolve into the sea. New beginnings are not marked by grand declarations. They are born in moments like these. Quiet, unassuming, but filled with promise. The betrayal, the courtroom, the whispers, they were all chapters of a story that had reached its conclusion. What remained was the blank space ahead, waiting for us to fill it with joy, honesty, and resilience. I understood then that revenge had never been the true destination. Justice had been necessary, but the journey's end was something greater. It was freedom. It was the power to begin again, unshackled by deceit, and to step into a life shaped not by betrayal, but by hope. The past was behind me. The future was mine to claim. And with every sunrise, I embraced it. Not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as the author of a new beginning. In the end, betrayal did not define me. My response did. I learned that revenge does not need anger or violence. True power lies in patience, in strategy, and in standing firmly for justice. Sometimes the greatest victory is not destroying the one who hurt you, but reclaiming your life with dignity.